Question 1. To address the challenge of integrating new digital sorting technologies, Osterreichische Post needs to provide sample data to an external technology partner for system development and testing. What is the most appropriate method for Osterreichische Post to share this data while ensuring compliance with Austrian data protection regulations and maintaining customer privacy? Option A. Share a representative subset of anonymized customer data, ensuring that no personally identifiable information can be linked back to individuals. Option B. Transfer a complete dataset of customer information, including names, addresses, and contact details, to the technology partner for their internal development. Option C. Provide the technology partner with direct access to Osterreichische Post's live customer database for real-time testing. Option D. Share a limited amount of pseudonymized data, where some identifying information is replaced with codes, but the key to re-identification is retained by Osterreichische Post. The correct answer is A. Share a representative subset of anonymized customer data, ensuring that no personally identifiable information can be linked back to individuals. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Osterreichische Post, as a publicly regulated entity, must adhere strictly to Austrian postal regulations and data protection laws when handling customer information. The core of the challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with the imperative to protect sensitive customer data from unauthorized access or disclosure, which is a fundamental ethical and legal obligation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data handling process, including the proposed digital transformation, is compliant and secure. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment and the implementation of robust data anonymization techniques before any data is shared with external technology partners. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and privacy by design, as mandated by Austrian data protection laws, e.g., DSG Datenschutzgesetz, and relevant EU regulations like the GDPR, which are directly applicable to Austrian businesses. By anonymizing data, Osterreichische Post significantly reduces the risk of re-identification, thereby safeguarding customer privacy, while still enabling the technology partner to develop and test their solutions effectively. This proactive measure demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical data stewardship. An incorrect approach that involves sharing raw customer data with the technology partner without adequate anonymization or consent mechanisms would constitute a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This would directly violate data protection principles, potentially leading to significant fines under the DSG and GDPR, reputational damage, and a loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying the digital transformation due to an overestimation of data sensitivity risks, would hinder operational progress and potentially lead to a competitive disadvantage, failing to meet the company's strategic objectives. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over data security by cutting corners on anonymization protocols would be a direct breach of legal and ethical duties, exposing Osterreichische Post to substantial liabilities. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical considerations from the outset. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction Austria, conducting a comprehensive data protection impact assessment, DPIA, for any new data processing activities, and consulting with legal and data privacy experts. The process should involve identifying potential risks, evaluating mitigation strategies, and selecting the approach that best balances business needs with legal and ethical obligations, always erring on the side of caution when customer data is involved. Question 2. The review process indicates that a colleague at Osterreichische Post has requested access to specific customer delivery information that is not directly relevant to your immediate tasks. You are aware that Osterreichische Post has strict protocols regarding customer data access. Which of the following is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Forward the colleague's request to your direct supervisor without any further interaction or assessment of the request's validity. Option B. Advise the colleague to try and find the information themselves through unofficial channels if they cannot access it through their usual means. Option C. Politely decline the request, citing Osterreichische Post's internal policies and Austrian data protection regulations that govern customer data access, and suggest the colleague follow the official procedure for such requests. Option D. Provide the colleague with the requested customer delivery information directly, assuming they have a legitimate reason for needing it. The correct answer is C. Politely decline the request, citing Osterreichische Post's internal policies and Austrian data protection regulations that govern customer data access, and suggest the colleague follow the official procedure for such requests. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an employee of Osterreichische Post to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure adherence to internal policies and relevant Austrian postal regulations concerning data handling and customer privacy. The core challenge lies in balancing the need to assist a colleague with the imperative to uphold Osterreichische Post's commitment to data security and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between permissible assistance and actions that could compromise sensitive information or violate established protocols. The correct approach involves politely declining the request and explaining that Osterreichische Post's internal policies and Austrian data protection laws, e.g., GDPR as implemented in Austria, prohibits sharing customer data without explicit authorization or a legitimate business need. This approach upholds regulatory compliance by preventing unauthorized access to sensitive information and reinforces the company's commitment to data privacy. It also demonstrates professional integrity by adhering to established procedures and ethical standards. An incorrect approach of directly providing the requested customer information to the colleague fails to recognize the strict data protection requirements applicable to Osterreichische Post. This action would constitute a breach of internal policy and potentially violate Austrian data protection laws, leading to severe consequences for both the employee and the company, including reputational damage and legal penalties. Another incorrect approach of forwarding the request to a supervisor without first assessing the colleague's stated need or offering to guide them through the proper channels is less severe, but still inefficient and potentially unhelpful. While it avoids direct policy violation, it bypasses an opportunity for immediate, compliant resolution and could create unnecessary administrative burden. A third incorrect approach of vaguely suggesting the colleague look it up themselves, without providing any guidance on the proper, authorized method for accessing such information, is also professionally deficient. It fails to offer constructive assistance and could inadvertently lead the colleague to seek unauthorized means of obtaining the data, thereby perpetuating the risk of noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the core request and its potential implications for data privacy and company policy. 2. Consulting internal policies and relevant regulations to understand the boundaries of permissible action. 3. Communicating clearly and politely, explaining any limitations based on policy or regulation. 4. Offering compliant alternatives or guidance on the correct procedure if possible. 5. Escalating the matter if the request falls outside one's authority or if there is a genuine concern about a policy violation. Question 3. What factors determine the appropriate handling and access of customer data by an Osterreichische Post employee during their regular course of employment? Option A. The explicit authorization granted by Osterreichische Post's internal data protection policies and the necessity of the data for performing official job duties. Option B. The employee's personal interest in the customer's information and the perceived convenience of accessing it. Option C. The employee's discretion to share information with friends or family if it does not directly impact the customer's immediate transactions. Option D. The general availability of similar information in public domains and the employee's assumption of its non-confidentiality. The correct answer is B. The employee's personal interest in the customer's information and the perceived convenience of accessing it. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an Osterreichische Post employee to navigate the complex interplay between internal company policies and general principles of data protection and privacy, specifically as they relate to customer information handled during their employment. The core challenge lies in ensuring that all actions taken regarding customer data are compliant with both Osterreichische Post's established guidelines and the overarching legal framework governing data handling in Austria, without overstepping boundaries or misinterpreting regulations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate business needs for accessing or processing data and unauthorized or inappropriate use. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Osterreichische Post's internal data protection policies and procedures, coupled with a general awareness of Austrian data protection laws. This ensures that any action taken is within the scope of authorized duties and respects customer privacy. Specifically, this means only accessing customer data when necessary for performing official job functions, such as processing mail, managing deliveries, or handling customer inquiries, and doing so in a manner that minimizes risk and maintains confidentiality. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework governing data protection in Austria, which mandates that personal data be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently, and collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes. Furthermore, Osterreichische Post, as an employer, has a responsibility to train its employees on these policies and ensure compliance, thereby protecting both the company and its customers from data breaches and legal repercussions. An incorrect approach of accessing customer data for personal curiosity or for reasons unrelated to official duties represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It violates the principle of purpose limitation, a cornerstone of data protection law, which states that data should only be processed for the specific purposes for which it was collected. It also breaches the duty of confidentiality expected of employees handling sensitive information and likely contravenes Osterreichische Post's internal code of conduct and data handling policies. Another incorrect approach of sharing customer data with unauthorized third parties, even if seemingly benign or for a perceived good cause outside of official business, is a severe breach of data protection regulations and company policy. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure, potentially leading to identity theft, fraud, or other harms to the customer, and exposes Osterreichische Post to substantial legal penalties and reputational damage. Finally, an incorrect approach of assuming that all data encountered is public, and therefore freely usable, ignores the nuances of data privacy. While some information might be publicly available, customer data handled by Osterreichische Post in the course of its business is typically considered confidential and subject to strict privacy controls, regardless of its potential public availability elsewhere. Misinterpreting the scope of data privacy can lead to unintentional but serious compliance violations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding the specific task and its relation to authorized job functions. 2. Consulting Osterreichische Post's internal policies and guidelines for data handling. 3. If in doubt, seeking clarification from a supervisor or the designated data protection officer. 4. Always erring on the side of caution when dealing with customer data, ensuring that any access or processing is strictly necessary, lawful, and transparent. Question 4. Process analysis reveals that a customer service representative at Osterreichische Post has encountered a situation where a colleague, who is not directly involved in a specific customer's ongoing complaint resolution, has requested access to the customer's detailed personal information and transaction history. The colleague claims this information is needed to better understand the context of a general discussion about customer service challenges within the department. Which of the following actions best aligns with the data protection regulations and internal policies of Osterreichische Post? Option A. Grant the colleague access to the data, but instruct them to only view it and not to save or share it further. Option B. Forward the request to the data protection officer for guidance without granting access to the data. Option C. Provide the colleague with the requested customer data, as it might help improve overall customer service understanding. Option D. Politely decline the request, explaining that access to customer data is strictly limited to individuals with a direct, authorized need for it in their job function, and suggest alternative ways to discuss general service challenges. The correct answer is C. Provide the colleague with the requested customer data, as it might help improve overall customer service understanding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Osterreichische Post regarding the appropriate handling of sensitive customer data. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's operational needs with the strict data protection regulations applicable in Austria, specifically the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, as implemented and supplemented by Austrian law. Employees must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance, prevent data breaches, and maintain customer trust. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the internal data protection policies of Osterreichische Post, which are designed to align with GDPR requirements. This means only accessing and processing customer data when it is absolutely necessary for performing official duties, and ensuring that such access is logged and authorized. This approach is correct because it directly upholds the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and accountability mandated by GDPR. It protects customer privacy by preventing unauthorized access and misuse of personal information, thereby fulfilling the company's legal and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach would be to access customer data for personal curiosity or to share it with colleagues without a legitimate business need. This failure constitutes a direct violation of GDPR principles of purpose limitation and data minimization. It also breaches Osterreichische Post's internal data protection policies, which are legally binding. Such actions can lead to severe penalties for the company, including significant fines and reputational damage, as well as disciplinary action for the employee. Another incorrect approach would be to disregard data protection protocols due to perceived urgency or convenience, assuming that the end goal justifies the means. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the fundamental importance of data privacy and the legal ramifications of non-compliance, leading to potential data breaches and loss of customer confidence. Professionals at Osterreichische Post should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data protection. This involves 1. Understanding the specific purpose for which data access is required. 2. Verifying that this purpose is legitimate and authorized by company policy and GDPR. 3. Accessing only the minimum data necessary. 4. Ensuring data is handled securely. And 5. Reporting any suspected breaches or policy violations immediately. When in doubt, employees should always consult their supervisor or the designated data protection officer. Question 5. The assessment process reveals that an Osterreichische Post employee, while reviewing internal documents, discovers a discrepancy that suggests a potential overstatement of revenue in the company's upcoming financial report. The employee is unsure of the exact implications, but believes it warrants attention. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for this Osterreichische Post employee? Option A. Attempt to correct the discrepancy independently to avoid causing unnecessary alarm within the company. Option B. Ignore the discrepancy, assuming it is a minor error that will be caught during the final audit. Option C. Discuss the discrepancy with a trusted colleague outside of the official reporting structure to gauge their opinion. Option D. Immediately report the discrepancy through Osterreichische Post's designated internal compliance channels, following the company's whistleblowing policy. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the discrepancy through Osterreichische Post's designated internal compliance channels, following the company's whistleblowing policy. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where an Osterreichische Post employee is presented with information that could potentially impact the company's financial reporting. The situation is professionally challenging because it requires the employee to navigate a delicate balance between their duty to the company, their personal integrity, and adherence to regulatory requirements. The potential for misreporting or non-disclosure carries significant legal and reputational risks for Osterreichische Post. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are compliant with Austrian law and ethical standards. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the discovered information through the designated internal channels at Osterreichische Post, such as a compliance officer or a supervisor, while strictly adhering to the company's internal whistleblowing policy. This approach is correct because it upholds the principles of transparency and accountability mandated by Austrian corporate governance laws and financial reporting standards. It ensures that any potential irregularities are investigated promptly and appropriately by those with the authority and responsibility to act, thereby safeguarding the integrity of Osterreichische Post's financial statements and protecting stakeholders. An incorrect approach of ignoring the information or attempting to resolve it independently without proper authorization would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Ignoring the information would violate the employee's duty of care and potentially lead to material misstatements in financial reports, which is a direct contravention of Austrian accounting and securities laws. Attempting to resolve it independently could lead to further complications, unauthorized actions, and a failure to follow established compliance procedures, thereby undermining the company's internal controls and potentially creating legal liabilities for both the employee and Osterreichische Post. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively disclosing the information to external parties, without following established protocols, would breach confidentiality agreements and could lead to market manipulation or insider trading violations under Austrian law. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established company policies and regulatory frameworks. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information and its potential impact. 2. Consulting the company's code of conduct and compliance policies. 3. Utilizing the designated reporting channels for sensitive information. 4. Documenting all actions taken. 5. Seeking guidance from the compliance department if unsure. This structured approach ensures that actions are both legally compliant and ethically sound, protecting both the individual and the organization. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that Osterreichische Post is considering a new digital platform to manage customer correspondence, which will involve processing personal data. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with data protection regulations during the implementation phase? Option A. Prioritize rapid deployment of the platform to gain a competitive advantage, addressing any data protection concerns reactively as they arise. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) before deployment, integrating privacy by design principles into the platform's architecture and operational procedures. Option C. Rely on existing general IT security policies to cover data protection aspects, assuming they are sufficient for the new platform's requirements. Option D. Delegate the entire responsibility for data protection compliance to the IT development team, without specific regulatory guidance. The correct answer is A. Prioritize rapid deployment of the platform to gain a competitive advantage, addressing any data protection concerns reactively as they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the strict adherence to regulatory requirements concerning data handling and customer privacy. Osterreichische Post, as a postal service provider, handles a significant volume of sensitive personal information, making compliance with data protection laws paramount. The challenge lies in implementing new technological solutions that streamline processes without compromising the integrity and security of this data, as mandated by Austrian and EU regulations. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment and the integration of data protection principles from the outset of the project. This means proactively identifying potential privacy risks associated with the new system, such as unauthorized access, data breaches, or improper data processing, and designing mitigation strategies accordingly. This aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and security as enshrined in relevant data protection legislation, ensuring that Osterreichische Post operates within legal boundaries and maintains customer trust. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over a comprehensive data protection review would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would stem from a disregard for regulatory obligations, potentially leading to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a breach of customer privacy rights. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on technical functionality without considering the broader implications for data handling and user consent, would also be flawed. This overlooks the ethical and legal responsibilities associated with processing personal data, creating a vulnerability to noncompliance. Professionals tasked with such implementation should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape governing data protection in Austria. This involves consulting relevant legal counsel and data protection officers, conducting a detailed impact assessment, and ensuring that all proposed solutions are designed with privacy by design and by default principles. Continuous monitoring and auditing of the implemented system are also crucial to maintain ongoing compliance. Question 7. System analysis indicates that an Osterreichische Post employee, while attending a professional development seminar outside of work hours, overhears a discussion about a new logistics optimization strategy being developed by a direct competitor. The employee's spouse works for this competitor and has expressed frustration about their company's current inefficiencies. The employee considers sharing the overheard information with their spouse to help them, believing it could indirectly benefit Osterreichische Post by highlighting areas where their competitor might be vulnerable in the future. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Osterreichische Post employee? Option A. Discreetly share the overheard information with their spouse, framing it as general industry insight to help their spouse's company improve. thereby indirectly benefiting Osterreichische Post by fostering a more competitive landscape. Option B. Immediately report the overheard information to their direct supervisor at Osterreichische Post, detailing the source and nature of the information, and inquire about any internal policies regarding the handling of competitive intelligence. Option C. Share the overheard information with their spouse, encouraging them to use it to advance within their company, with the understanding that any future insights gained from their spouse's advancement could then be shared with Osterreichische Post. Option D. Assume the overheard information is not significant enough to warrant concern and take no action, as it was not directly obtained through their employment with Osterreichische Post. The correct answer is A. Discreetly share the overheard information with their spouse, framing it as general industry insight to help their spouse's company improve, thereby indirectly benefiting Osterreichische Post by fostering a more competitive landscape. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Osterreichische Post due to the inherent conflict between personal financial interests and the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the employer. The core of the challenge lies in navigating situations where an employee's actions could inadvertently benefit a competitor or compromise Osterreichische Post's strategic advantages. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance, ensuring that personal pursuits do not negatively impact the company. The correct approach involves prioritizing Osterreichische Post's interests and adhering strictly to internal policies and relevant Austrian employment law concerning conflicts of interest and data protection. This means proactively disclosing any potential conflicts and refraining from actions that could be perceived as detrimental to the company, even if no direct harm is immediately apparent. This aligns with the general principles of good faith employment and the duty of care owed by an employee to their employer under Austrian law, which implicitly requires employees to act in the best interests of their employer and avoid situations that could lead to a conflict of interest or misuse of confidential information. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with sharing information without considering the potential ramifications for Osterreichische Post. This could lead to regulatory breaches if the shared information constitutes confidential business data, potentially violating data protection regulations or contractual obligations. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that personal benefit automatically negates any harm to the employer. This overlooks the ethical obligation to avoid even the appearance of impropriety and the potential for indirect competitive disadvantage. Finally, ignoring internal company policies on conflicts of interest and information sharing is a direct violation of employment terms and can lead to disciplinary action and legal repercussions. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Osterreichische Post's code of conduct, employment contract, and relevant Austrian legal frameworks. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, an employee should first identify the nature of the conflict. Second, they should assess the potential impact on Osterreichische Post, considering both direct and indirect consequences. Third, they should consult internal policies and, if necessary, seek guidance from their supervisor or the HR department. Finally, they must act in a manner that demonstrably prioritizes the company's interests and upholds ethical standards. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that Osterreichische Post needs to implement a new system for managing customer feedback. A proposed solution involves integrating a third-party platform that offers advanced analytics but requires uploading a significant amount of customer data. The team is under pressure to launch quickly. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Osterreichische Post's regulatory obligations and professional responsibilities? Option A. Integrate the third-party platform using a limited subset of anonymized data initially, and then gradually introduce more data as the consent verification process is streamlined, accepting a slower rollout for the full feature set. Option B. Immediately integrate the third-party platform and upload all available customer data to leverage its full analytical capabilities, assuming that the urgency of the business need outweighs the need for immediate detailed consent verification. Option C. Proceed with the integration of the third-party platform, ensuring that the data is encrypted during transit and at rest, and that a data processing agreement is in place with the vendor, while initiating a review of customer consent mechanisms for future data collection. Option D. Delay the implementation of the new system until a comprehensive audit of all existing customer data and consent records can be completed. Even if this means significant delays, in launching the feedback management system? The correct answer is C. Proceed with the integration of the third-party platform, ensuring that the data is encrypted during transit and at rest, and that a data processing agreement is in place with the vendor, while initiating a review of customer consent mechanisms for future data collection. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with the ethical and regulatory obligations concerning data privacy and security. Osterreichische Post, like any organization handling sensitive information, must adhere to strict data protection laws. The challenge lies in making a decision that is both efficient for the business and compliant with legal requirements, avoiding any actions that could lead to data breaches or misuse. The correct approach involves prioritizing data security and compliance with the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which is the primary regulatory framework governing data protection in Austria. This approach recognizes that, while efficiency is important, it cannot come at the expense of legal and ethical standards. Specifically, it means ensuring that any data sharing or processing is done with explicit consent or a clear legal basis, and that robust security measures are in place. This aligns with the core principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and integrity and confidentiality as mandated by the GDPR. An incorrect approach that involves sharing customer data without verifying consent or a legal basis would be a direct violation of the GDPR. This failure stems from a disregard for the fundamental rights of individuals concerning their personal data, leading to potential legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach, which is to delay the process indefinitely due to fear of noncompliance, is also professionally unsound. While caution is necessary, an inability to implement necessary processes due to an overly cautious or paralyzing fear of error can hinder legitimate business operations and customer service, potentially leading to operational inefficiencies that could indirectly impact service quality. A third incorrect approach, which is to implement a solution that is quick but bypasses necessary security checks, is equally problematic. This prioritizes speed over security, creating a significant vulnerability that could result in a data breach, with severe legal and financial consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that starts with identifying the core problem, then thoroughly researching the relevant legal and regulatory requirements. In this case, GDPR. This should be followed by evaluating potential solutions against these requirements, considering both operational efficiency and compliance. Risk assessment is crucial, identifying potential negative outcomes of each option. Finally, the decision should be made based on the option that best balances operational needs with legal and ethical obligations, ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the process. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a long-term business client of Osterreichische Post, known for its consistent and predictable transaction patterns, has recently engaged in a series of unusually large cash deposits across multiple branches within a short period, deviating significantly from their historical behavior. An employee at one of these branches observes this pattern and is aware of the company's internal guidelines on identifying and reporting suspicious activities. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to take in this situation, adhering to the regulatory framework applicable to Osterreichische Post? Option A. Continue to process the transactions as usual, assuming the client has a legitimate, albeit unusual, business reason for the deposits, and monitor for further deviations. Option B. Immediately contact the client directly to inquire about the reason for the increased cash deposits, explaining that their recent activity is unusual. Option C. Advise other branch employees to be vigilant for similar transactions from this client and to flag them for personal review before processing. Option D. Document the observed activity and report it internally to the designated compliance officer or department within Osterreichische Post, following established reporting procedures. The correct answer is A. Continue to process the transactions as usual, assuming the client has a legitimate, albeit unusual, business reason for the deposits and monitor for further deviations. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in compliance and risk management within a regulated entity like Osterreichische Post. The core difficulty lies in balancing operational efficiency and business objectives with the stringent requirements of regulatory frameworks designed to prevent financial crime and ensure market integrity. Specifically, The challenge is to identify and act upon suspicious activity without unduly disrupting legitimate business operations or infringing upon customer rights, all while adhering to the specific directives applicable to Osterreichische Post. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of escalating potential concerns to the designated compliance function. This ensures that the initial observations are reviewed by individuals with the expertise and authority to assess them against relevant regulations and internal policies. This aligns with the principle of know your customer and the obligation to report suspicious transactions, as mandated by Austrian financial market regulations and relevant EU directives that Osterreichische Post must observe. The regulatory framework requires that employees report any suspicions of money laundering or terrorist financing, and this reporting must be done through established internal channels to the compliance department, which then undertakes further investigation and potential reporting to the authorities. This structured escalation process is crucial for maintaining an effective anti-financial crime program. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the observation without further internal consultation, thereby failing to fulfill the reporting obligation. This could lead to the facilitation of illicit activities and expose Osterreichische Post to significant legal and reputational risks. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the customer or initiate an external investigation without involving the compliance department. This bypasses established protocols, potentially tipping off the subject of suspicion and compromising any subsequent investigation by law enforcement or regulatory bodies. Furthermore, it could violate customer privacy regulations and internal procedures. A third incorrect approach would be to delay reporting due to perceived operational inconvenience. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to compliance and a disregard for the serious implications of financial crime, which is a direct contravention of regulatory expectations for diligence and promptness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory mandates and internal policies. This involves 1. Recognizing potential red flags based on training and experience. 2. Consulting internal policies and procedures for guidance on handling such situations. 3. Escalating concerns through the designated reporting channels to the compliance department without delay. 4. Documenting all observations and actions taken. 5. Cooperating fully with the compliance function and any subsequent investigations. This structured approach ensures that all actions are compliant, defensible, and contribute to the overall integrity of the organization's risk management framework. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of access to customer address databases by a specific employee within Osterreichische Post during non-standard working hours, raising a potential concern regarding data privacy compliance. Option A. Implement a blanket policy restricting all employee access to customer databases outside of standard business hours, regardless of individual roles or prior access history. Option B. Immediately suspend the employee's access to all company systems and initiate disciplinary proceedings due to the suspicious access pattern. Option C. Initiate a formal investigation into the employee's access logs, cross-referencing with their job responsibilities and company policies, and consult with the data protection officer to determine the appropriate next steps based on Austrian data protection laws. Option D. Dismiss the alert as a system anomaly without further investigation, assuming the employee was performing legitimate, albeit unusual, tasks. The correct answer is C. Initiate a formal investigation into the employee's access logs, cross-referencing with their job responsibilities and company policies, and consult with the data protection officer to determine the appropriate next steps based on Austrian data protection laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with the ethical imperative to protect sensitive customer data. The Osterreichische Post, like any postal service, handles a vast amount of personal information, making data privacy a paramount concern. The challenge lies in identifying potential breaches or misuse of data without unduly hindering legitimate business operations or creating a climate of distrust. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between routine operational activities and potential violations of data protection regulations. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based investigation. This means gathering all available information, cross-referencing it with established protocols and legal requirements, and then making a reasoned judgment. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principles of due diligence and responsible data handling, which are fundamental under Austrian data protection laws, particularly the Datenschutzgesetz (DSG) and the EU's General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR), as implemented in Austria. It prioritizes a thorough understanding of the situation before taking any action, ensuring that decisions are informed and justifiable. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume a breach and take punitive action without sufficient evidence. This could lead to unjustified accusations, damage to employee morale, and potential legal repercussions for the Osterreichische Post if the action is found to be discriminatory or without proper cause. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the alert entirely, which would be a direct violation of data protection obligations and could expose the company to significant risks, including regulatory fines and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach would be to overreact by implementing overly restrictive measures that impede essential business functions, demonstrating a lack of understanding of operational realities and potentially violating principles of proportionality. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legal and ethical obligations. This involves 1. Information gathering. Collect all relevant data from the monitoring system and any other available sources. 2. Contextualization. Understand the normal operational context of the activity flagged by the system. 3. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential impact of the flagged activity on data privacy and security. 4. Consultation. If necessary, consult with legal or compliance departments. 5. Action planning. Based on the assessment, determine the appropriate course of action, which could range from further investigation to implementing corrective measures or closing the alert if unfounded. This structured approach ensures that decisions are compliant, ethical, and proportionate. Question 11. Quality control measures reveal a recurring delay in the processing of outgoing international mail at Osterreichische Post's main sorting facility. Several operational staff members have suggested implementing a new, faster sorting method that bypasses a specific verification step, arguing it will significantly reduce processing times. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation while adhering to professional standards and the operational integrity of Osterreichische Post? Option A. Rely on the operational staff's experience and implement the new sorting method without further investigation, as they are closest to the process. Option B. Immediately implement the proposed faster sorting method to address the delays and improve efficiency. Option C. Focus solely on increasing staffing levels at the facility to absorb the backlog, without altering the current sorting process. Option D. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis of the delays, evaluate the proposed method's impact on accuracy and compliance, and explore alternative, compliant optimization strategies. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement the proposed faster sorting method to address the delays and improve efficiency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the integrity of Osterreichische Post service delivery and adherence to established operational procedures. The core tension lies in identifying process improvements that are both effective and compliant with internal guidelines and potentially relevant postal service regulations, without compromising the quality or security of mail handling. Careful judgment is needed to distinguish between genuine optimization and shortcuts that could lead to errors, delays, or breaches of trust. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the identified bottlenecks, focusing on root cause analysis and proposing solutions that align with Osterreichische Post's operational standards and any applicable Austrian postal regulations. This method ensures that any changes are well documented, tested for efficacy, and do not introduce new risks. It prioritizes a thorough understanding of the current process before implementing modifications, thereby upholding the company's commitment to reliable service. This aligns with the general principles of good corporate governance and operational excellence expected of a national postal service, which implicitly requires adherence to established procedures and a focus on customer satisfaction through dependable delivery. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a comprehensive impact assessment risks overlooking potential negative consequences. For instance, implementing a change that speeds up sorting but increases misdeliveries would be a regulatory and ethical failure, as it directly contravenes the fundamental duty of accurate mail delivery. Another incorrect approach might involve bypassing established quality checks to meet tighter deadlines. This would be a failure of internal control and could lead to a decline in service quality, potentially violating service-level agreements or customer expectations, and undermining the trust placed in Osterreichische Post. A third incorrect approach could be adopting a solution based on anecdotal evidence or a single employee's suggestion without rigorous testing or validation. This lacks the professional diligence required to ensure the proposed change is robust and sustainable, potentially leading to unforeseen operational disruptions and a failure to achieve genuine process optimization. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or inefficiency. This is followed by gathering data, analyzing root causes, brainstorming potential solutions, evaluating these solutions against criteria such as effectiveness, cost, risk, and compliance, and then selecting and implementing the most suitable option. Post-implementation monitoring and evaluation are crucial to confirm the success of the change and make further adjustments if necessary. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with organizational objectives and regulatory expectations. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals that certain operational processes at Osterreichische Post are significantly slower in specific departments, potentially impacting overall delivery times. To address this, management is considering implementing new performance metrics and potentially reallocating resources based on these findings. What is the most appropriate initial step for Osterreichische Post to take in response to these findings? Option A. Focus solely on the financial implications of the slower departments and seek immediate cost-cutting measures. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to evaluate the legal and ethical implications of the efficiency study's findings and any proposed changes, ensuring compliance with data protection and labor laws. Option C. Share the detailed findings of the efficiency study with all employees to encourage self-improvement and transparency. Option D. Immediately implement new performance metrics and reallocate resources to the faster departments to improve overall efficiency. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to evaluate the legal and ethical implications of the efficiency study's findings and any proposed changes, ensuring compliance with data protection and labor laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Osterreichische Post, as a public service provider and a significant employer, operates under a strict regulatory environment that prioritizes data protection and fair employment practices. The efficiency study's findings, if acted upon without proper risk assessment, could lead to discriminatory practices or breaches of employee privacy, both of which carry significant legal and reputational consequences under Austrian law, particularly concerning data protection, DSGVO/GDPR, and labor law. Careful judgment is required to balance the pursuit of operational efficiency with legal compliance and ethical considerations. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment that considers the potential impact of the efficiency study's findings on individual employees and the company's legal obligations. This approach prioritizes understanding the nature of the data collected, its lawful basis for processing, and the potential for misuse or discriminatory application. By identifying and mitigating risks proactively, Osterreichische Post can ensure that any implemented changes are compliant with the DSGVO, Datenschutzgrundverordnung, and relevant Austrian labor legislation, safeguarding employee rights and maintaining trust. This aligns with the ethical imperative to treat employees fairly and with respect, and the legal requirement to process personal data lawfully and transparently. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without considering the legal and ethical implications would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, implementing changes based on the efficiency study without assessing whether the data used was collected with appropriate consent or for a legitimate purpose would violate the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation under the DSGVO. Furthermore, if the efficiency study's findings lead to differential treatment of employees based on the collected data without objective justification, it could constitute discrimination, violating Austrian labor law and principles of equal treatment. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the potential for bias within the efficiency study itself, leading to decisions that unfairly disadvantage certain groups of employees, thereby failing to uphold ethical standards of fairness and equity. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to the situation. This involves identifying all applicable laws and guidelines, such as the DSGVO and Austrian labor laws. Next, they should analyze the specific findings of the efficiency study, evaluating the data collected and its potential implications. A critical step is to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, identifying potential legal, ethical, and reputational risks. Based on this assessment, mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, ensuring that any actions taken are compliant and ethically sound. Finally, ongoing monitoring and review are essential to ensure continued compliance and to adapt to any changes in regulations or operational circumstances. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates that the current manual process for handling customer feedback forms at Osterreichische Post is time-consuming and prone to errors. To improve efficiency, a proposal has been made to digitize all historical and incoming feedback forms and store them in a central, easily searchable database. What is the most appropriate approach to implement this change while adhering to Austrian data protection regulations? Option A. Implement a system that digitizes all forms, pseudonymizes customer contact information where possible, and applies strict role-based access controls to the database, ensuring only authorized personnel can view identifiable data. Option B. Digitize all forms and store them in a central database, focusing solely on the technical aspects of data storage and retrieval without conducting a prior data protection impact assessment. Option C. Digitize all forms and store them in a central database, making all fields fully searchable and accessible to all customer service representatives to expedite response times. Option D. Digitize all forms and store them in a central database, but immediately delete any form containing personal contact details to avoid potential privacy risks. The correct answer is A. Implement a system that digitizes all forms, pseudonymizes customer contact information where possible, and applies strict role-based access controls to the database, ensuring only authorized personnel can view identifiable data. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the strict adherence to data privacy regulations as mandated by Austrian law, specifically in the context of customer data handling by a company like Osterreichische Post. The need to streamline internal processes must be balanced against the legal obligations to protect sensitive customer information. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any implemented solution not only improves efficiency, but also remains fully compliant with the GDPR and relevant Austrian Data Protection Acts. The correct approach involves a thorough data impact assessment and the implementation of anonymization or pseudonymization techniques where feasible, coupled with robust access controls. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation enshrined in GDPR Article 5, which requires personal data to be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Furthermore, it upholds the right to data protection as a fundamental right under Austrian law and the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. By prioritizing privacy-preserving methods, the company demonstrates a commitment to ethical data stewardship and legal compliance, mitigating risks of fines and reputational damage. An approach that prioritizes immediate data aggregation without a prior privacy assessment fails to acknowledge the sensitive nature of customer data and the legal requirements for its processing. This could lead to potential breaches of data protection laws, such as processing data for purposes not explicitly consented to or failing to implement adequate security measures, thereby violating GDPR Articles 5, 6, and 32. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on technical solutions without considering the legal framework, might overlook crucial aspects like data subject rights, e.g., right to access, erasure, or the necessity of a legal basis for processing, leading to non-compliance. A third incorrect approach, which involves discarding data that could be useful for operational improvements without exploring privacy-compliant alternatives, represents a missed opportunity for innovation and could be seen as inefficient from a business perspective, though it avoids direct legal breaches. However, it fails to achieve the optimal balance between operational needs and data protection. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific legal and regulatory requirements applicable to the data in question. This should be followed by a risk assessment, identifying potential privacy implications of any proposed operational change. Subsequently, exploring and evaluating solutions that are both operationally effective and legally compliant, prioritizing privacy by design and privacy by default principles, is crucial. Finally, ongoing monitoring and review are necessary to ensure continued adherence to regulations and adapt to any changes in the legal landscape or operational needs. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a fully digital archiving system for all customer correspondence at Osterreichische Post could significantly reduce physical storage costs and improve retrieval times. However, the proposed system's data retention capabilities might not perfectly align with the minimum statutory periods mandated by Austrian postal regulations for certain types of historical records. Which approach best ensures Osterreichische Post's compliance and operational integrity? Option A. Conduct a detailed legal review of the Austrian Postal Act, Post G, and related ordinances to confirm that the digital archiving system's retention, security, and accessibility features fully meet all statutory requirements before implementation. Option B. Implement the digital archiving system and rely on general data protection best practices to ensure compliance, without a specific review of the Post G's requirements for postal service record-keeping. Option C. Proceed with the digital archiving system, assuming that the proposed system's retention periods are sufficiently close to the legal minimums and that the cost savings justify a minor deviation. Option D. Prioritize the cost savings by implementing the digital archiving system and address any potential regulatory discrepancies retrospectively if they arise. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the digital archiving system, assuming that the proposed system's retention periods are sufficiently close to the legal minimums and that the cost savings justify a minor deviation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Osterreichische Post, as a public service provider, must balance operational efficiency with its regulatory obligations and public trust. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the relevant Austrian postal regulations concerning service standards and data handling, particularly when faced with potential cost savings that might compromise these standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed changes adhere strictly to the legal framework and ethical considerations governing postal services in Austria. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the Austrian Postal Act, Post G, and related ordinances to determine if the proposed digital archiving solution for customer correspondence meets all legal requirements for data retention, security, and accessibility. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and data integrity, ensuring that Osterreichische Post continues to meet its statutory obligations. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of lawful data processing and the protection of customer information as mandated by Austrian data protection laws, which are integral to the postal service's operational framework. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings without a comprehensive regulatory review risks violating the Post G. For instance, if the digital archiving system does not guarantee the same level of data integrity, security, or accessibility as physical records, or if it fails to meet specific retention periods stipulated by law, it would constitute a regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing the digital solution based solely on a superficial understanding of data protection principles, without consulting the specific requirements of the Post G, potentially leading to breaches of customer privacy or non-compliance with audit trails. Relying on generic industry best practices without verifying their alignment with Austrian postal law is also a failure, as specific regulations often dictate precise operational standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core regulatory requirements applicable to the situation. This involves consulting the relevant Austrian legislation, such as the Post G, and any implementing decrees. Subsequently, they should assess proposed solutions against these specific legal mandates, considering not only the immediate cost-benefit, but also the long-term implications for compliance, data security, and customer trust. If there is any ambiguity, seeking legal counsel or clarification from the relevant regulatory bodies is a crucial step before implementation. Question 15. System analysis indicates that Osterreichische Post is considering a new digital platform for customer service interactions. Which approach to assessing the associated risks would best align with regulatory expectations and professional best practices for a company of this nature operating in Austria. Option A. Prioritize risks based on their potential to immediately increase revenue, as this is the primary driver for new technology adoption. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential operational disruptions, data security vulnerabilities, and compliance issues with Austrian data protection laws, and then develop targeted mitigation strategies. Option C. Assess risks solely from the perspective of IT infrastructure capacity, assuming other risk categories are secondary. Option D. Focus the risk assessment primarily on the public perception of the new platform, ensuring positive media coverage is prioritized. The correct answer is A. Prioritize risks based on their potential to immediately increase revenue, as this is the primary driver for new technology adoption. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Osterreichische Post, as a significant employer and service provider, operates within a regulated environment that mandates robust risk assessment procedures. The challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing potential risks that could impact the company's operations, reputation, and compliance with Austrian postal and data protection laws. A failure to conduct a thorough and appropriate risk assessment can lead to significant financial penalties, operational disruptions, and damage to public trust. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of potential risks, considering their likelihood and impact, and then developing mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance expected under Austrian law, particularly concerning operational efficiency and data security. Specifically, a structured risk assessment process ensures that Osterreichische Post can proactively address threats, allocate resources effectively, and maintain its service standards. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate financial gains without considering broader operational or legal implications would be professionally unacceptable. This overlooks the potential for long-term damage to the company's reputation and its ability to operate legally. Another incorrect approach that neglects the human element, such as employee well-being or training needs, fails to recognize that personnel are a critical component of operational risk and compliance. Ignoring these aspects can lead to internal failures, breaches of duty of care, and non-compliance with labor laws. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes external perceptions over internal operational realities might lead to superficial solutions that do not address the root causes of potential risks, leaving Osterreichische Post vulnerable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to Osterreichische Post in Austria. This involves identifying all relevant laws and guidelines, such as those pertaining to postal services, data protection, DSGVO, and employment. The next step is to define the scope of the risk assessment, considering all operational areas. A systematic process of risk identification, analysis, likelihood, and impact, evaluation, and treatment should then be followed. This framework emphasizes a proactive and holistic view of risk management, ensuring that decisions are informed by both regulatory requirements and the practical realities of the business. Question 16. The audit findings indicate that a senior manager at Osterreichische Post, responsible for overseeing procurement contracts, also holds a non-executive board position with a significant supplier to Osterreichische Post. This dual role has not been formally disclosed to Osterreichische Post's compliance department. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the senior manager to take? Option A. Continue to manage procurement contracts impartially, relying on personal integrity to avoid any conflict of interest. Option B. Resign from the board position with the supplier to eliminate any potential conflict. Option C. Immediately disclose the board position and the supplier relationship to Osterreichische Post's compliance department and relevant supervisory body. Option D. Wait to see if the supplier relationship leads to any preferential treatment before considering disclosure. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the board position and the supplier relationship to Osterreichische Post's compliance department and relevant supervisory body. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential conflict of interest involving a senior manager at Osterreichische Post who is also a board member of a key supplier. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's best interests with individual ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks that could compromise Osterreichische Post's procurement processes, reputation, and financial integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are made impartially and in accordance with established governance principles. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate oversight body within Osterreichische Post, such as the Compliance Department or the Supervisory Board. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical standards expected of employees and management. Specifically, Austrian corporate law and internal company policies typically mandate the disclosure of such conflicts to prevent undue influence and ensure fair dealing. By disclosing, the senior manager initiates a formal process for assessing and managing the conflict, which may involve recusal from relevant decision-making processes or other mitigation strategies. This proactive step upholds the integrity of Osterreichische Post's operations and demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the relationship, or to believe that personal integrity alone is sufficient to manage the conflict without formal disclosure. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risks of perceived or actual bias, which can erode stakeholder trust and lead to regulatory scrutiny. Another incorrect approach would be to delay disclosure, hoping the issue resolves itself or that it goes unnoticed. This not only violates disclosure obligations, but also creates a greater risk of reputational damage and potential legal repercussions if the conflict is discovered later. Furthermore, attempting to manage the conflict unilaterally without involving the company's governance structures bypasses established control mechanisms designed to protect Osterreichische Post from such risks. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and seeking guidance. This involves recognizing potential conflicts early, understanding the relevant internal policies and external regulations. In this case, Austrian corporate law and Osterreichische Post's specific code of conduct, and proactively reporting the situation to the designated authority. The decision-making process should be guided by the principle of acting in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders, ensuring that all actions are defensible and ethically sound. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that Osterreichische Post is facing pressure to improve its quarterly earnings. A proposal has been put forward to significantly reduce investment in its digital transformation initiatives and streamline its logistics network by closing several smaller, less profitable depots. Which approach best balances the immediate financial pressures with Osterreichische Post's long-term strategic vision and stakeholder interests? Option A. Delay any decision on the proposed measures and wait for market conditions to improve, without further analysis of the current proposals. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment of the proposed changes on Osterreichische Post's long-term competitive positioning, customer service, employee morale, and overall strategic goals before making any decisions. Option C. Focus solely on maximizing shareholder returns by immediately implementing all cost-saving measures and distributing any resulting surplus as dividends. Option D. Prioritize the proposed cost-saving measures by immediately reducing investment in digital transformation and closing depots to boost short-term profitability. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the proposed cost-saving measures by immediately reducing investment in digital transformation and closing depots to boost short-term profitability. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a publicly traded company, Osterreichische Post, with its long-term strategic goals and the expectations of its diverse stakeholders. The pressure to demonstrate short-term profitability can conflict with investments that yield future benefits, but may depress current earnings. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions align with Osterreichische Post's sustainable growth strategy and regulatory obligations, rather than succumbing to short-sighted financial demands. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the proposed strategic investment's long-term value creation potential, considering its alignment with Osterreichische Post's stated strategic objectives and its impact on all relevant stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, and the broader community. This approach prioritizes sustainable growth and responsible corporate citizenship, which are implicitly encouraged by the regulatory environment governing publicly listed companies in Austria, focusing on transparency, good corporate governance, and long-term value. This aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and investor relations expected of a company like Osterreichische Post. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost-cutting without considering the strategic implications would fail to recognize the potential for such measures to erode Osterreichische Post's competitive advantage and long-term market position. This could lead to a decline in future revenue and profitability, ultimately harming shareholder value. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on shareholder dividend without reinvesting in the business, neglects the need for ongoing innovation and infrastructure development essential for Osterreichische Post's continued success and market relevance. This can lead to stagnation and a loss of competitiveness. An approach that disregards the impact on employee morale and customer satisfaction by implementing drastic, unconsidered changes would also be professionally unsound, potentially leading to operational disruptions, loss of talent, and damage to Osterreichische Post's brand reputation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of Osterreichische Post's strategic objectives and the current market landscape. This involves evaluating potential actions against these objectives, considering their impact on all stakeholder groups, and assessing their alignment with regulatory expectations for corporate governance and financial reporting. A balanced perspective, weighing short-term implications against long-term sustainability and value creation, is crucial for making sound, responsible business decisions. Question 18. Upon reviewing internal reports at Osterreichische Post suggesting a potential breach of company policy by a specific employee, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for investigating this matter by accessing the employee's work-related digital communications? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive and unfettered review of all digital communications associated with the employee's work account to gather all potentially relevant information. Option B. Initiate a broad search across all company servers for keywords related to the alleged policy breach, without prior notification to the employee. Option C. Access only those specific digital communications that are directly and demonstrably linked to the alleged policy breach, following a documented internal procedure that includes justification for the scope of access. Option D. Obtain explicit written consent from the employee for a targeted review of specific digital communications deemed relevant to the alleged policy breach. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive and unfettered review of all digital communications associated with the employee's work account to gather all potentially relevant information. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's operational needs and the regulatory requirements for data handling and employee conduct. Osterreichische Post, like any organization, must balance efficiency with compliance. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that any internal investigation or data review is conducted in a manner that respects employee privacy and adheres strictly to Austrian data protection laws, particularly the GDPR as implemented in Austria. A hasty or overly broad approach could lead to legal repercussions, damage employee trust, and undermine the integrity of the investigation itself. The correct approach involves a targeted and legally compliant data access strategy. This means that when investigating potential policy violations by an employee of Osterreichische Post, access to employee data should be limited strictly to what is necessary for the investigation, with clear justification and, where applicable, employee consent or legal authorization. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation enshrined in Austrian data protection law. The process must be transparent to the extent possible without compromising the investigation, and any data accessed must be handled with the utmost confidentiality and security. This approach safeguards the company from legal challenges and upholds ethical standards. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a broad, unfettered search of an employee's work-related digital communications without specific cause or authorization. This violates the principle of data minimization, as it involves collecting and processing more data than is strictly necessary for the stated purpose. It also infringes upon the employee's right to privacy and data protection under Austrian law. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal or undocumented methods of data access, bypassing established company policies and legal frameworks. This creates a lack of accountability and can lead to inconsistent application of rules, potentially resulting in discrimination claims and a breakdown of trust within Osterreichische Post. Professionals at Osterreichische Post should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific provisions of Austrian data protection law and company policies related to employee data and investigations. Before initiating any data review, a clear and documented rationale for the investigation and the scope of data access required must be established. Consultation with legal counsel or the data protection officer is crucial to ensure that all actions are permissible and proportionate. Transparency with the employee, to the extent legally permissible, and maintaining a clear audit trail of all data access activities are also vital components of responsible professional practice. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a perceived inefficiency in the parcel sorting process at specific Osterreichische Post hub. The stakeholder, a significant business partner, is requesting immediate access to internal performance metrics and operational logs to verify their concerns. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and internal guidelines for handling such requests at Osterreichische Post? Option A. Share the requested operational logs with the stakeholder after redacting any personally identifiable information, as this demonstrates a willingness to cooperate. Option B. Acknowledge the stakeholder's feedback. Initiate an internal review of the parcel sorting process according to established company procedures, and communicate the findings or actions taken through the designated communication channels. Option C. Inform the stakeholder that their feedback is not a priority and decline to provide any internal information, suggesting they rely on publicly available information. Option D. Immediately provide the requested performance metrics and operational logs to the stakeholder to demonstrate transparency and address their concerns directly. The correct answer is D. Immediately provide the requested performance metrics and operational logs to the stakeholder to demonstrate transparency and address their concerns directly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Osterreichische Post due to the potential conflict between stakeholder expectations and the company's internal policies and regulatory obligations. Navigating such situations requires careful judgment to ensure compliance, maintain stakeholder trust, and uphold the company's reputation. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the desire to address stakeholder concerns promptly with the need to adhere to established procedures and legal frameworks governing data handling and communication within Osterreichische Post. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review and adherence to established communication protocols. This means acknowledging the feedback, initiating an internal investigation or assessment as per company policy, and then communicating the findings or actions taken through the appropriate channels. This approach is professionally sound because it respects the internal governance structures of Osterreichische Post and ensures that any response is informed, accurate, and compliant with relevant Austrian data protection laws, e.g., GDPR as implemented in Austria, and internal communication guidelines. It prioritizes due diligence and a structured response, which is crucial for maintaining operational integrity and legal compliance. An incorrect approach would be to directly disclose internal operational details or customer data to the stakeholder without proper authorization or verification. This failure stems from a disregard for data privacy regulations and internal confidentiality policies. Such an action could lead to severe legal repercussions, including fines under data protection laws, and damage the trust placed in Osterreichische Post by its customers and partners. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the feedback outright without any form of internal assessment. This demonstrates a lack of responsiveness to stakeholder concerns and could lead to reputational damage, as it suggests that Osterreichische Post is not attentive to its operational performance or the experiences of those it serves. Finally, an approach that involves making promises or commitments to the stakeholder without consulting relevant departments or understanding the full implications would also be professionally unsound, as it could lead to unmet expectations and further complications. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the nature of the feedback, identifying relevant internal policies and regulations, consulting with appropriate internal departments, e.g., legal, compliance, customer relations, and then formulating a response that is both transparent and compliant. This structured process ensures that actions taken are defensible, ethical, and aligned with the company's strategic objectives and legal obligations. Question 20. Strategic planning requires Osterreichische Post to set ambitious performance targets for its delivery services. An employee notices that to meet a newly introduced, aggressive delivery speed KPI, the most efficient method would involve temporarily bypassing a standard parcel tracking verification step, which could potentially lead to minor inaccuracies in real-time tracking data for a small percentage of parcels. This bypass is not explicitly forbidden by law, but is against the spirit of the company's internal data integrity policy. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee? Option A. Ignore the KPI for the time being and continue with the standard procedures, as the risk of any deviation from policy is too high. Option B. Report the potential conflict between the KPI and the data integrity policy to their supervisor and request clarification, or a revised approach that ensures both compliance and target achievement. Option C. Proceed with the bypass, but document the deviation from the policy for future reference, believing that the short-term benefit outweighs the minor policy infraction. Option D. Implement the bypass to meet the KPI, assuming the risk of minor tracking inaccuracies is acceptable for achieving the performance target. The correct answer is D. Implement the bypass to meet the KPI, assuming the risk of minor tracking inaccuracies is acceptable for achieving the performance target. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Osterreichische Post due to the inherent conflict between achieving performance targets and adhering to ethical and regulatory standards. The pressure to meet key performance indicators, KPI, can tempt individuals to overlook or compromise on established procedures, potentially leading to negative consequences for the company, its customers, and its reputation. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to the internal code of conduct and relevant Austrian postal regulations, even if it means a temporary shortfall in meeting a specific KPI. This aligns with the fundamental principles of responsible business practice and regulatory compliance. Osterreichische Post, as a public service provider, is subject to strict regulations governing its operations, including data protection, service quality, and fair competition. Upholding these regulations is paramount, as breaches can result in significant fines, legal action, and reputational damage. The internal code of conduct further reinforces these ethical expectations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on meeting the KPI by circumventing established procedures would be professionally unacceptable. This could involve misrepresenting data, engaging in unfair competitive practices, or violating customer privacy, all of which are explicitly prohibited by Austrian law and the company's own ethical guidelines. Such actions demonstrate a disregard for regulatory frameworks and ethical responsibilities, leading to severe repercussions. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term financial gains over long-term compliance would also be flawed. While profitability is important, it cannot be achieved through means that violate legal or ethical standards. This approach fails to recognize that sustainable success is built on trust and integrity, which are eroded by non-compliant practices. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's code of conduct and applicable Austrian laws. When faced with a conflict, an employee should first identify the potential ethical and regulatory implications. They should then consult relevant internal policies and seek guidance from their supervisor or the compliance department if unsure. The ultimate decision should always prioritize compliance and ethical conduct, even if it requires a more challenging path to achieving business objectives.